All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we are going to talk and be in the 147-pound division where ERROL Spence Jr.'s trainer, Derrick James, has broken down Terence Crawford and given you his thoughts in a series of interviews about what Terence Crawford is missing and what ERROL Spence Jr. has to beat him. And to summarize it in one word, it is depth. Depth. And he differentiates people who have been built and fighters that have been developed. Let's talk about that and explain it in this video. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. So, Derrick James, the trainer of the year in the sport of boxing, the man that, as far as I know, has the most championship belts right now of one trainer sitting in his stable. The trainer of ERROL Spence Jr., who is a three-belt holder right now at welterweight, holding the WBC, the IBF, the WBO. Also, Jermell Charlo, who holds 4 belts, the WBA, the WBC, IBF, and WBO at 154 pounds. He's also the trainer of Frank Martin, who will be fighting in just a few weeks before the ERROL Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford fight, who is one of the top lightweights. And he just recently took on Anthony Joshua, who is a former 3-belt holder at heavyweight. Also, Ryan Garcia, who was in one of the biggest fights this century against Gervonta Tank Davis. He gave a series of interviews on YouTube channel to a guy who the channel is titled Marco. Please forgive me. I'll put the link in the description to the series of interviews that he's given about various topics in the sport of boxing. He also, in the press conferences that took place with ERROL Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford, both in Beverly Hills, California, and New York City, echoed some of the same thing in many of the interviews that you see going around. And that is about ERROL Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. But now, before I get into the details of it, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, consider subscribing to the channel if you like the content. If you don't, hey man, hit the like button, hit the dislike button. It's all we ask for this video. Also, if you are a longtime subscriber and supporter of the channel, let me say thank you very, very much for your continued support. This video I'm going to dedicate to one of my favorite subscribers, 2 subscribers that I speak to every day, Barbara D and Aisha. Ladies, how are you guys doing? Hope you enjoy this video. But before we get into that, I just want to tell you real fast about today's sponsor, the Boxing Showtime app. It's a very useful app that keeps you updated on all things boxing, and you can keep up with the latest fights, where to watch them, the latest news, and a lot more. For any hardcore boxing fan like myself, and most likely all of y'all, I would definitely recommend downloading it. And it also is most definitely a big support to the channel. It's available for both Apple and Android, and you can find the link in the description below. Thanks for considering downloading Boxing Showtime's app. But let's get back into the subject matter of the video. There's been several things that Derrick James has let out, and I would put them in 3 categories. Three categories. One is he talked about the skill set and athleticism. Number 2, he talked about the development of the fighter. And number 3, he talked about styles. Let's take the development of the fighter first. He differentiates a fighter that has been built with a fighter that has been developed. And if you heard what ERROL Spence Jr. has said about Terence Crawford, and not just Terence Crawford, many fighters over there at Top Rank. He said, look, these guys are smoke and mirrors. These guys are in fights where they are getting set up and match made into fights so that the person that they're fighting can look as good as they possibly can look in that fight. And they are picking the opponents in order to make them look good. And that is what he refers to as building a fighter, and essentially building a fighter's name, saying that, okay, we're gonna sign this guy, we're gonna give him 15 fights, we're gonna make sure that, you know, he's on television, he gets a title, he fights a guy, you know, with a good name who may be older, or a good name, a guy that, you know, is too young, and, you know, has undefeated also, but really isn't on the same level of him. And we're going to promote it as two young, undisputed fighters fighting each other, right? So one guy wins, the other guy moves on. Or you put him in there with a guy, say somebody like a Keyshawn Davis, who is a very good fighter, Olympic silver medalist, signed with Top Rank. Say in the next couple fights that he fights Richard Comey, right? Richard Comey comes back down to 135 pounds, and Richard Comey is a former 135-pound IBF titleist from several years ago who lost his title to Teofimo Lopez. And once Keyshawn Davis gets to 10, 11, 12 fights, they put him in with Richard Comey, knowing that Richard Comey has been on the downslide for several years. However, he still has that name. And you put Richard Comey in there. You put Keyshawn Davis in there with Richard Comey. Keyshawn Davis beats Richard Comey. Now, when you go to BoxRec, you see the name Richard Comey next to Keyshawn Davis, and then you look at it and you think, okay, well, this looks similar to the way that, let's say, Robert Easter Jr.'s resume looks, where Robert Easter Jr. has a win over Richard Comey. When that is just, number one, the book wasn't out on Richard Comey on how to fight him when Robert Easter fought him. He was much younger, much fresher. He hadn't already been beat up by several other people, right, in multiple weight classes. But yet that name looks good on the resume of Keyshawn Davis, right? Versus somebody that is developed, right? Not saying that you can't build somebody's name and develop them as a fighter at the same time, but building somebody as a fighter is when you put them in there with guys that are going to always push them, who are going where there's some risk of him losing. There's something for him to overcome, and you're putting him and getting a young fighter and developing his skill set. You're putting him in there with a tough southpaw. You're putting him in there with guys that will push him and make him see and look for different things, with the goal of making him the best fighter and giving him the best experiences, and putting him in situations where once he gets to the top of the sport, he would have already been there and done that. So on one hand, you have building the fighter's name, which is putting them in fights where they look good against named opponents that they can beat, and situations where they can look spectacular, right? Where versus developing somebody where you're putting them in certain types of fights where they may not even look that good in the fight. However, they're not looking that good in the fight because they've been specifically matched against this guy, because this guy can give him problems and push him, right? So when Derrick James is talking, where Errol Spence Jr. says, look, man, Top Rank is smoke and mirrors, Terence Crawford's resume, like, who was he beat? When did he beat him? That's what he's talking about. And saying that essentially that, like, there's a mirage with Terence Crawford's, or there could be a mirage with Terence Crawford's resume where everything looks really, really good with the names on it. But if you look underneath it, you'll see, no, these guys were not really in a position to beat Terence or provide any type of pushback on him. And more than likely, that's when we won the fight. Basically the best, in my opinion, the best thing to illustrate this point is when Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. are going back and forth about Kell Brook, where Errol Spence Jr. was fighting for his first world championship, right? Several years ago, and he goes over there to the UK to fight a guy in his backyard, the reigning champion in his backyard, a fighter who is a good, solid fighter, was definitely the top, if not the number 2 welterweight in the division at the time, right? And people's bodies decline. People hit peak. You're not the same fighter at different points in times in your career. So where ERROL goes over there and accomplishes that, then people comparing that to Kell Brook, where Kell Brook had already been beaten by Errol Spence Jr. He hadn't been in the weight division for 3 years. He then comes down a weight class, right? He was at 154 and fighting guys that were easy, soft pick'em fights for 3 years. Comes back against Terence Crawford into a weight class he hadn't been in 3 years, and Terence Crawford beats him. And acting as if those are the same thing. No, that is similar to what I said about Robert Easter Jr. fighting Richard Comey versus Keyshawn Davis fighting Richard Comey a year from now, right? A year from now, Richard Comey may be completely dried up and done, right? Same thing with somebody beating Keith Thurman 2 years from now versus somebody that beat Keith Thurman a year ago or fought Keith Thurman a year ago. Can be completely different fighters, right? So that's who Derrick James is pointing to that. Now, the other things that he talks about is the athleticism of a fighter and what a fighter relies on. And when you're being developed as a fighter, are you being developed as a fighter that is going to be able to deal with things in the long run, right? So in the case of Terence Crawford, they keep saying, look, man, he relies on his, or implying that a lot of athletes rely on their reflexes. They rely on their athleticism and like missing shot by an inch, and then coming over and counter punching them and relying on the fact that their hands are faster or their feet are faster or that they can see something, they can react faster. Well, if you're looking at the arc of people in the game of any sport, that starts high, you can go up, it can stay high, you can get stronger, get better, and then at a point in time, your body starts falling off and you're going to have to start relying a lot more on fundamentals. So the question is, does Terence Crawford have the fundamentals to deal with his advanced age, right? And has he been developed into the type of fighter that can deal with somebody like ERROL? People keep saying that ERROL has not fought anybody like Terence Crawford. And that's true. Also, Terence Crawford has never fought anybody like Errol Spence. Not one time in his career has he got in there with a guy that is a peak champion, that has multiple title title defenses over a series of years against top-notch opposition. If you go through and look at everybody Terence Crawford has fought for belts at the title, that doesn't apply to anybody. Doesn't apply to Ricky Burns, doesn't apply to Ray Beltran, does not apply to Yuriorkis Gamboa, does not apply to Julius Ndungo, does not apply to Jeff Horn, does not apply to, it doesn't apply to Keith Thurman or Kell Brook. There's somebody that has been established at a weight class and continued to win over a series of years, and you're fighting him right at the peak or close to the peak of his career. Now, man, so that's what Errol Spence Jr. or at least Derrick James is implied in those interviews, and what it sounds like Errol Spence Jr. is referring to in the interviews that he gives. Now, for everybody who wants to cry and say, "Oh, you're just so pro Errol Spence Jr." Hey, man, if Terence Crawford's camp would give me something other than we'll figure it out, other than we're going to bust him up, we're going to beat him, you're going to see how easy it's going to be. If there's some type of analysis that comes from them about what they see specifically in Terence Crawford, in Errol Spence Jr., hey, man, no worries. But that's going to be limited to the car accident or whether or not he was drinking at a certain point in time, whether or not he's the same fighter that he was before the fight got announced. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.